Welcome to Deprogrammed on Unsafe Space. I'm your host, Carter Laren, with my co-host, Keri Smith. As always, Keri, say hello.
Hello. Hi, guys.
As always, you can follow the show at Unsafe Show on Twitter. You can go to youtube.com/unsafespace. And I don't know, we have Facebook pages and stuff like that. And Keri will yell at me later for not advertising those properly. Today, we have a really cool guest. I'd like to welcome Tom Golden. Tom's the author. He's an author and a psychotherapist who has specialized in working with men and boys. He's written 3 books on the unique ways that men and boys heal and has given workshops in Europe, Australia, the US, and Canada. His work has been featured on CBS Evening News, CNN, New York Times, The Washington Post, and many others. He recently appeared in the Red Pill movie, which, by the way, if you haven't seen it, it's an awesome movie. You should go see it. And he can be found at menaregoods.com and on Twitter at trgolden. He also has a YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/1menaregood1. Tom's biggest sin, as far as I can tell, is thinking that men are good. So, Tom, welcome to Deprogrammed, you horrible sinner.
I'm a sinner indeed.
So we did a show a little while ago about this horrific document. I don't know if anyone can see. This is the American Psychological Association guidelines for the psychological practice with boys and men. But you know, we're lay people and we don't have experience helping men and boys in therapy, and you do. And you were actually on the mailing list and kind of involved at some point, I guess, with the Division 51, which is who published this, and have a unique perspective. So before I trash it, why don't you tell us where this came from, what your thoughts are on it, as someone who's an expert here?
Well, you know, I first met Division 51 in 2007 or 8, I think, something like that. And they welcomed me in, you know, because a couple of them had read my first book and they liked it and they introduced me, and it was all well and good until I started saying things like men are good, you know, and that's when we kind of fell apart. And they are a strictly feminist group. In fact, if you say anything negative about feminism, you are chastised for it. And if you look at their mission statement, it clearly says that we owe a debt to feminist scholarship. You know, because it has exposed all the oppression that these men have done for decades. And so, you know, we didn't get along really well because I was kind of a male-friendly guy, and I don't see them as male-friendly even a little bit.
You called them, you basically said it was misandry. I think I heard you say.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it, actually. You know, that's a nice way. They've got their own way of seeing things. And to me, it's like this. They're only seeing the feminist ideas and they can't see anything else. And there's been so much, Carter, that's happened in the last 15 years about men and boys and psychological stuff. I mean, it's just incredible what's going on. I mean, the little things like the testosterone flood. I'll bet you've probably never heard of the testosterone flood.
I've actually have, because I've read a little bit. I know about the 2D4D thing.
2D4D.
But
that's right. And that 2D4D comes from that testosterone flood that happens in utero for little boys. And sometimes actually for little girls. But this changes the brain. It changes everything. In fact, they know now that that flood, the testosterone flood, sensitizes the receptors in the brain for testosterone, so that later in life, the boys are going to, when they get testosterone, bing, you know, they're going to really vibrate. When the girls get it, it's probably not going to be quite as strong because of those receptors.
Interesting.
Can you just define what that is for people who aren't familiar with it?
Define what is, Keri?
The testosterone flood?
Well, about 2 months in utero. So the mom is 2 months pregnant and the little baby is about yay big. I mean, it's tiny, right? But what happens is there's this flood of testosterone that's primarily, I think it's testosterone made by the mother. And this flood literally floods the baby boy. And it's the first of 3 floods that boys get of testosterone. And this flood has the most effect, I think, on the brain and what's happening in the brain. There's been some great work done by, what's his name, Simon Baron-Cohen on what this testosterone does to the brain. And what he's concluded is that this changes the male brain into what he calls a systemizing brain, where boys and men are interested in systems, how things work, taking things apart, putting things together. And the girls are more interested in relationship kinds of things. Now, this is not a black and white. It's not like, one pile of boys and one pile of girls. It's not like that at all. It's a lot of gray. But in general, boys are going to be more interested in the system stuff. And there's just all sorts of things. Now, there's 3 floods. The first one is there in utero. The second one is right after birth. They found that boys are flooded with testosterone again. And they do not know much about it, but they're starting to study it. And it lasts about a month or 2. And you'll notice any parent who's had a little baby boy, right about after they're first born, what happens? He's got a little erection. Bing! That's the testosterone. You change that diaper and bing! And that's what's happening. He's being flooded with testosterone again. Of course, the 3rd flood happens when the boys are in puberty.
Right. Right. And you even mentioned that that testosterone changes how oxytocin mitigates cortisol levels. So when you're under stress, how oxytocin affects you depends on your testosterone levels.
Yes.
So it affects women and men differently, which is fascinating to me.
Yeah, that was great. That's from the Shelley Taylor research of 2002, I think, where she found that, she studied stress and she was curious about, women have never really been studied. All this stuff with fight or flight is men being studied. I'm only going to study women and let's see what it looks like. And sure enough, she studied only women and she came to the conclusion that women don't fight or flight. Women tend and befriend. They tend and befriend. Translated means women move towards interaction when they're stressed, whereas men and boys will move towards either action or inaction, solitude, right? Now think about it. Right. Just that one little bit of research has a huge impact on how any therapist is going to treat boys and men. I mean, because most therapists are going to expect the boys and men to act exactly like the girls do. Because therapy and the training for therapy is based on trying to teach therapists how to help women.
Interesting.
Literally. I mean, it's like, oh God, when I first started working, I got this caseload of men, and I did it. I got this caseload because all the women, I was the only guy there, right? All the women say, oh, Golden Handle, he's a guy, give him the men. So I get all these men, right? And it's like, I didn't know what to do because the women that I saw in therapy, I could do what I was taught in graduate school. You sit and you face each other and make good eye contact and you talk about the past and you talk about feelings. But when I tried that with men, it didn't work the same way. Did not work the same way. And I realized, oh my gosh, I'm doing something wrong here. And so that took me on a long journey to try and find out, how are men and boys different? And the Shelley Taylor material is just so important because when you're working with a man in therapy, you do not want to say, what are you feeling today? Much better to ask him, what are you doing? Where are you going? What are you thinking about? Because that's where he harmonizes. That's where he feels comfortable and safe,
Yeah.
And there's,
look, I'm not a therapist, but when I read the Way Men Heal book, and I got to say, I thought anyone who wants to work with men, that's a way better guideline than this APA crap, right? I mean, that was like, some of it just blew my mind. I mean, your observation, I'll just say personally, 2 things that really stood out to me. One is your observation that men view eye contact as a dominance hierarchy challenge.
Right.
Was like, oh yeah, totally. Right. So that doesn't make me want to talk about my feelings. Right. And the second was, you had an example of someone, I guess it was their parent had died, their father died or whatever. And you made this comment that, well, most men would probably be happier building the casket than standing in the corner and like talking about it.
Yes.
And that really resonated with me as well. I thought, I had never thought that way before, but I realized, yeah.
Yes.
I'd rather like get together with people that knew him and build the casket.
Exactly.
And that just seems like a way better way to process. And it just never occurred to me because as a non-therapist, I just assume therapy is what we see on TV. We see Tony Soprano go in and then sit down with his therapist and speak to her face to face, among other things, with Tony.
Yes.
But that's the model.
Yes.
And your book to me, they should have started with that book instead of what they did start with the APA guidelines. So let's get back to that. Where did these guidelines come from?
Oh my gosh, they come from Division 51. And I looked at the authors on there, and I knew probably half of them, and I knew the way these guys think. And so I'm not surprised when I read through those guidelines, because that's literally the way they think. That's what they think is right. And this is a very, very bright group. These psychologists on the APA Division 51 list are bright people. They're very intelligent people. But from my perspective, they're seeing things through a blinder. They're not able to see things outside their own little ideology. The stuff like the Shelley Taylor material, the testosterone flood, and there's probably 10 or 15 more things like that they simply will not accept. And I spent, a year on that mailing list talking with them about these different things until they finally kicked me out,
Right. And you weren't the only one. I think you said some other guy was banned for bringing up male victim of violence too much.
Yes. The guy before me that got kicked out, who I stood up for, and that's why I think they wanted to kick me out, because I stood up for him. And they repeatedly said, we can't have him here because he talks too much about male victims of domestic violence.
Wow. So
what?
So to borrow some of their language, so basically you guys got in trouble because you were centering maleness when talking about men.
That's a nice way to put it.
They say centering. They use that language a lot. But yeah, you were centering maleness when you should have been centering femaleness and talking about men.
Exactly. There you go. That's about
And you said actually you had people express to you that they kind of wanted to secretly support you, but they were afraid to post anything or say anything in the professional circles because they were worried about their career.
Yeah, they were afraid to post to the actual mailing list because these guys on that mailing list are very, very, they're the top people. They're the people who the media calls, to ask questions about psychological stuff. And they also have some jurisdiction over APA and over licenses and things like that. Who knows? But these guys would write and they'd say, thank you for standing up for men and boys, but I can't really support you. I can't support you because if I did, I'd lose my job.
Yeah.
So what does that tell us? That tells us that these people are bullies. Mm-hmm. They're bullies.
Absolutely.
They're not able really to see a different perspective. They're not able to tolerate someone who's got a different perspective. They're going to throw them out. Oh, so I was lucky because I'm in private practice. I mean, they can't do too much to me. Mm-hmm. And what are they going to do to me? But these other people, I feel bad for them. These other psychologists who just get, thrown under the bus if they look like they're supporting men.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a crazy place.
You wrote, so I got to say, as a layperson, especially, I guess, as a man, but I imagine Keri may feel the same way. As a layperson, I look at the APA guidelines and I'm horrified that someone's going to read them and apply them, because it just seems like the absolute worst way to try and help men. And you wrote, I think I'm quoting, you said the basic unvarnished theory is that masculinity is the source of our problems and that men need to learn to be more mature, which is code for men need to act more like women. Yes. And you actually said people said that explicitly.
Yeah, there was a couple people who basically said that very thing. I can't quote them exactly, but the idea, the general idea was that, you better be more like women because the world is going to be a better place as soon as we can get the men to act more like women. This is the truth,
That's the way to help men, to eradicate them.
Basically. Well, yeah, because the masculine stuff is something wrong with them.
Yeah.
And
well, let's get into the history of that, because I also read an article you wrote about the conformity to masculine norms inventory that Mahalik proposed, and I was also just like the article was disturbing to learn the history here. Do you want to give us a quick overview of the masculine norms? You had a problem with 4 in particular, but do you mind giving us a quick overview of what you wrote there?
I'd be happy to. What's it called? The CNMI?
CMNI. Yeah. Conformity to masculine
norms inventory. And it's this inventory that tries to look at what are the norms for men and how do men conform or not conform to those norms. And good idea. But if you look at the norms they came up with, you got to scratch your head, because one of the norms was men are violent. One of the norms was men want to control women, power and control over women. Men disdain homosexuality, and men are playboys. They listed those as norms for men. And it's like, I read that, I went, what? Are you kidding me? Where did the guy get this? So the article that I wrote and that you read, I think, is about my response to that. And I started getting in touch with Mahalik and emailing him and asking him, where did he get these ideas? Where did he get the idea that a norm is violence, or the norm is power over women, or playboy? And so he wrote me back, and he gave me 2 articles to look at. He said, these will help you understand where I got these ideas. And I'm convinced that he gave me those 2 articles. They were pretty long, thinking that I would never take the time to read those and that I'd just drop it, right? No, he doesn't know.
Trust me, there are sources. Go away.
Here are the sources. But he didn't know me very well, because I read the whole thing and I wrote him back and I said, there's nothing in there that explains to me how you would choose those 4 norms. And then he said, I forget what it was, but he said, there was this book that he used to get the Playboy norm. And I said, okay, what's the name of the book? So he gave me the title, and I looked it up, Out of Print. So that didn't stop me. I found one. And sure enough, it listed Playboy as one of the norms for men. But it was 1% of men had chosen it as a norm. I read it back and said, wait a minute, the source you gave me says that you shouldn't use that as a norm, not that you should. And that's what the paper's about, this back and forth, between he and I, and about what he did. And then, to make matters worse, he wrote another one called the Conformity to Feminine Norms Inventory, about women and girls, and about how they conform or don't conform to norms in our culture.
Wait, what are our norms?
Well,
yours are all good. Don't worry, Keri.
Exactly.
Sugar and spice and everything nice.
Exactly right. But before I read it, I thought, maybe this guy's just being tough in general. He's going to be tough both on the men and the women. And I thought, he could write something about relational violence, or about mean girls, or about, all kinds of things, that's gossipy stuff. I mean,
manipulation. Yeah.
Yes. And I thought, wow, let me have a look. So I looked at it and, oh no, it's all sugar and spice.
Caretaking.
Nurturing.
Yeah. I have the list. It's nice in relationships, thinness, modesty, domestic, care for children, romantic relationships, sexual fidelity, and investment in appearance.
Wow.
Yeah. So, yay, women.
Nice, right? So on Division 51, I wrote a message. I said, okay, here are the 2 lists of norms for male and female. My sense is that the males list, he's much harder on the men, and he's much more negative about men, but on women, he goes easy. They all said, no, it's the same. It's the same for both of those lists. And I'm going, oh,
what?
Okay. Yes.
Violence and nice in relationships are the same thing.
Right. And that's how the blinders are on so tight that they literally cannot see it. I don't think that these are evil people. I think they just simply can't see things because they're so brainwashed with the feminist stuff. It's just, that's my take on it anyway.
Yeah.
Carter and I talk about this a lot, and we disagree once in a while on it, because I believe, I came from
because I have
system.
a power dominance desire over Keri.
You bet.
That's the main reason.
That violent form.
But I believe that there are well-meaning people in this ideology. Like you're saying, they're not evil. It's just that they have been convinced that this is the best way to, that the primary purpose in life is to change the world, to make it a better place. And the way that this is the way to do this is to push this belief system.
Yes.
And so they think they're being a good person by believing this stuff and spreading it. There are people in it, I think, who are bad, but I don't think it's all of them.
Too. Yeah,
I don't know, but I think there's a level of intellectual dishonesty that's necessary to receive the lists from Tom and not bother to look into them and just nod your head and be like, yeah, they're both good. They're the same.
Yeah, right? I'm with you on that, Carter. I mean, it's like there's a split here, and I guess I'm down the middle with both of you. But geez, I mean, it's just, you can't make this stuff up, you know, it's crazy.
Well, they do have
I mean,
blinders
can I cite some numbers? You also cited like, this is brilliant, right? You said they picked violence as a masculine norm, right?
Right.
And you used some publicly available data. So 0.18% of men were arrested for violent crimes. Okay, so that's a pretty small percentage we're going to use as a norm, right? But basically the same percentage of women abuse children. So you'd think that child abuse would be a female norm because that's the standard mathematically that we've set is 0.18%.
Right.
But of course, that's not included. And you also go on to talk about, I found this fascinating as I want to get into history. If we've got a little bit, I think we have a little bit more time here. You showed what masculine norms were. I've got a chart here in front of me from 1970, 78, 84, 86, 2003. And basically prior to 1990, there was a different view. Can you talk a little bit about the history and how those evolved over time? Because that also was disturbing and fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? When I first ran into the conformity to masculine norms inventory, I wondered, you know, well, what has been the history of this? What's the history of norms for men? And so I looked it up, and I found the movers and shakers of the masculine norms for the past, I guess it was about 50 years. Is that what it is? Goes back about 50?
Yeah, 1970. So yeah, about 50 years.
70, yeah, it's almost 50 now. How about that? 1970, 50 years ago. Jeez, easy, Louise. So I started studying, you know, what were these lists before, and came up with that chart. And you can read those off. I mean, the masculine norms before I thought were more accurate.
Yeah, so 1970, it was there was 4 listed, and it was independent style of achievement, competency, incompetency in feminine activities, and suppressing emotion. Neutral maybe, right? Yeah. By 1978, I think it was a little bit better. They added one. They had active, dominant in relationships, achievement-oriented, level-headed, self-contained. Like none of these are. They're not bad. There's nothing like violence and disdain.
And you go on there, they talk about leadership, you know. And
then they add leadership by 1986. They add leadership, willing to take risks, willing to take a stand, strong personality, assertive. Like, okay, those are good.
Yes.
But then we get to the violence and actually even the disdain for homosexuality. You pointed out, it's just. I guess I want to just step back for lay people. I think average people think that there's some level of intellectual honesty / objectivity here. And they also think that there's the scientific method or at least a reasonable attempt to follow standard practices to be objective. And neither one of those things are true. You went on and talked about both how the focus groups were constituted in order to come up with these norms. And you talked about, like, for the disdain for homosexuality, you identified the questions they used, and none of them were about disdain for homosexuality. They were all about, like, how would you feel if someone thought you were gay? It was all like a violation of your own identity. Like, well, if you don't identify as gay, you would probably be upset if someone thought you were gay. And like, that doesn't mean you disdain homosexuals.
Right.
So it's totally dishonest.
I would go on with that. I would go on with that.
So I don't mean to rant. I should use your time to talk. Have you talk?
No, man, you're singing my song. I mean, I don't have the article right in front of me, and so you're kind of.
So, well, I have a question. Quick question.
Oh, go ahead, Keri.
So you guys just talked about how in the 70s the norms listed for men were these more positive parts of masculinity. At what point did it change? When did it start to be?
It dropped off the cliff in 2008, was it? When the CMS
2003, when Mahalik did his but you also talk about the 1995 book from Connell that caused some problems. And Keri will be fascinated about the gender of this person as well. Like there's a story here. It's insane to me. Can you talk about that?
You can't make things up. You know, it's just too hard to believe. But there's this woman named Connell. Ray Wynn Connell, who actually wrote the book that most academies rely on about masculinity. And Ray Wynn decided that there were all sorts of hegemonic masculinities that showed that men were XYZ. And pretty much what I found was that it looked like Mahalik was simply pulling out the talking points from Ray Wynn Connell's book, pulling it out and putting it straight into the CMNI without studying, without getting a focus group to do anything, just putting it in there, Oh, well, crazy. But
now, was Ray Wynn a clinical psychologist, or what, do you know what Ray Wynn's background was?
I think she was a clinical psychologist. The history is that Ray Wynn Connell is actually a trans woman. That she was born biologically as a male, and then changed that to become a trans woman. But,
well, once you learn how horrible men are, why would you want to stay one?
Yeah, that's kind of what I've thought a couple of times about Ray Wynn, but it just does make me wonder that the person that most academics are trusting is someone who's got some confusion about their own gender. It's like,
I mean, it's even worse than that to me. And by the way, I'm fine with trans people, but this is someone who was a man and disliked it so much that they transitioned to a woman, and they're the expert on masculinity? Oh, no. How is that even possible?
I've been asking myself that very question, Carter. Thank you. And I have to agree, man. Trans people are fascinating and lovely. In fact, I don't know if you know or not, but a part of the research that I've done on understanding men and emotions comes from the writing of trans men. There's this one fella named, oh gosh, don't let me forget his name. I love this guy. I'll have to look it up before we stop. It'll probably come to me. But he's a trans man who wrote a book on this transition. And he wrote a book about what happened to him when he took huge doses of testosterone.
I remember you saying this. Yeah.
Max Valerio.
Yes.
The book is titled The Testosterone Files. And it's a great little book, but my interest in the book was the whole emotional side of things, because I wanted to know what happened to Max emotionally from being a biological female to then taking huge doses of testosterone and becoming male. And Max does not disappoint. Max is a very good writer, very articulate, and really describes a lot of the situations very clearly about what happened. And basically, Max says, women really have an advantage here, because we can feel, we like to talk about it, and we can articulate our feelings when we're in the midst of feeling them. As a man now, I cannot do that. My tears have dried up, which we knew before that testosterone limits emotional tears. My tears dried up, and now when I have feelings, I can't even articulate what's going on.
Wow.
And that's got to be testosterone. Think about all the men I've seen in therapy over the years, when in couples therapy, there's another female therapist, she says, well, what are you feeling now? And the poor guy will go, he cannot articulate it.
I've been in couples therapy. That's my response.
Absolutely. And it's not because there's something wrong with him. It's because there's something right with him. He's got this testosterone stuff that says, you're not going to be able to articulate this crap.
Yeah.
And men need to know this. This needs to be in those damn guidelines. That yes, men are going to have a harder time articulating their emotions. So we need to give them special treatment. We need to give them safety so that when they're in that safety, boom, the stuff will come out. And that's exactly what happens,
Yeah.
Because
and you said Max actually was changed his concept. He thought, like, I don't remember the language, but men were kind of problematic before, and they were just kind of horrible people. And then he transitioned, took a bunch of testosterone, and was like, actually, this is just the way it is. Like, I can't actually access my feelings.
Yeah, Max said something like, I used to think that men were just these piles of unprocessed emotion that was just boiling over, ready to lash out because they're not dealing with their feelings. Then he says, I was wrong. Max really learned that men are very different in the way we process emotions. That's the kind of crap that needs to be in these guidelines, Carter.
Absolutely.
It really needs to be there, because we need to love men for who they are. And they're not women, Now, some of them are. Some men are very much like women, and that's okay. We need to love them for who they are too. And some women are very much like men. but we need to take each person individually and be able to accept the way they are and to love them for who they are, you know?
Yeah. And just to be
right
clear,
now, we can't do that.
Right.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Right.
What?
No. It's great. I mean, just to be clear, you're not arguing that it's 100% biological what it makes a male,
No.
and I've heard you recognize that there's definitely social
Yes.
constructs here.
Yes,
but it
yes.
sounds like you're up against an entire industry that only sees the social constructs and is discounting anything biological.
When I was on Division 51, if I would mention testosterone, they would immediately label me a biological determinist.
Wow.
Oh,
Wow.
you're a biological
That's pretty
determinist.
harsh.
I know, that's what I thought. I said, no, I'm just saying this is one factor. You know, and it is. Testosterone is definitely a factor, as we've talked about today already, and there's lots more out there. You know, the testosterone research in the last 10 years has been fantastic because they've shifted their whole thoughts away from the idea that testosterone is about aggression and violence. And now they're understanding that testosterone is about striving for status.
It's back to the Jordan Peterson dominance hierarchy.
Yes, exactly. Basically. It is testosterone that fuels the hierarchy.
Yeah.
You know, because it pushes the men and boys to strive for status. He wants to get higher and higher and higher, but that's not all it does. It pushes him to strive for status. It lowers his fear. It raises his ability to take risks, and it gives him something else that's really important. It gives him what they're calling threat vigilance. Threat vigilance.
What is that?
This means that when someone comes up and challenges a man's status, that he is more likely to respond because he's got this threat vigilance stuff. It says, respond now. You've got to respond to that.
Right.
You've got to respond to that. And I've seen women for years scratch their heads. Why is he so defensive about that? Why he's such a big ego? Why can't he just let it go? It's biological, ladies. He's got this stuff in his blood that says you've got to respond. And think about it. People who are pretty smart, people who have, a good capacity are able to dance around that kind of challenge thing. But people who don't get into trouble, and that's where our violent crime comes from. Because
right, if you lack the verbal acuity to get yourself out of that situation and save face, you may resort to fists.
Yes, and there's all kinds of ways that men have been very creative in staying out of fights. Because every fight you've ever seen at a bar is usually related to hierarchy. Who's first, second, third, fourth? Oh, I'm bigger than you. Oh, no, you're not. Oh, yes, I am. Oh, no, I am. Boom.
Yeah.
And so most men have been very creative and be able to sidestep that. But about 1% get in trouble every year. Well, that's a pretty good percentage if you ask me.
Yeah, not bad.
Yeah.
Keri, you had a question?
No, I was just going to share a joke you made me think of, Tom.
Oh, good.
When you're talking about this, the trans man writer, I used to represent a trans comedian who was biological female, became a man. And he had this joke about when he was on testosterone, like, I guess essentially flooding himself with testosterone.
Yes.
How he got to where, the whole stereotype about how men think about sex more often, or they objectify women, what have you. How he would see a woman walk by and his testosterone brain would be like, look at her ass, look at her ass, look at her ass.
Yep.
But then his feminist brain is like, stop objectifying her.
How could you do that? How could you even think that?
Right.
It's true though. I mean, as a guy, you walk down the street and this very attractive woman comes by and you go, mm-hmm. And there's a party that says, turn around, look, turn around, look, turn around, look. Now, you'll miss it, It's true. It's true.
I have a question for you about violence as one of the traits, because I'm curious about what your thoughts are here. Violence to me is a very broad category. Not all violence is bad. We rely on men's ability to be violent in order to protect society and protect other people from both the threats of nature and the threats of outsiders wishing to do us harm. So it's weird to me that they throw violence in this category of like, they're talking about like the aggressive initiation of the use of violence against innocent people, but they never list it as like they never talk about it as like, gee, it's a good thing that you can stick a rifle in a guy's hand and send him to Europe to kill Hitler. Like that's necessary.
Yeah.
Is there any distinction there that you've ever seen, or is it just, violence is the bad thing and that's what men are full of?
I think that was kind of the assumption from the Mahalik piece was it wasn't about defending others. It was about just being violent for personal reasons, you know?
Right. Right.
Yeah, sad.
We have a question from the chat asking you, is there any way to get the guidelines changed? And is there any precedent for how that would happen?
Well, yeah, complain. You could complain to APA. I've already written a letter to the coming president of APA and told her what I think. And I would recommend everybody do that, you know?
Okay.
And I will get you her name and email after we get off. Because
That'd be great. We'll post it in the...
I can't remember. Yeah, because it's good. And just as a layperson, it's great, man. They need to hear this. They need to hear, and they're hearing a lot. They're getting a lot of feedback over this one, you know, but do not expect any change anytime soon. I mean, these people are locked in, and they're only going to double down, most likely.
I mean, according to what you've written here, it really was a long time coming.
And this has been going on for years. But people are starting to see it now because they've come out in the open with this guideline. And although they've had a conference for how to do therapy with men for every year for I think the past 10 years, and I looked at the program and I went, oh no, you know, oh no. Anyway,
feed them a bunch of soy.
Yeah, give them soy. That's exactly right. No bacon for you.
So Tom, look, I know you've got a hard stop. I could probably have this conversation for another 2 hours, but I want to respect your time. You know, any final thoughts before we let you go? Messages to anyone?
Yeah, men are good. You know, we need
that's heresy.
We need to hold that in our hearts that men are good because we have been bludgeoned with the idea that they are not. You know, the Division 51 ideas is there's something wrong with men, and now it's infiltrated into our educational system, into Hollywood, into the legislature, into every place you look, the media, for crying out loud. This whole thing with men, there's something wrong with them. So wear your men are good hat. Where's mine? Where's my men are good hat?
Oh, yeah. You can get this at menaregood.com. I saw this.
You can buy one at Men Are Good hat.
It's probably, it's probably more triggering than a Make America Great hat. So
that hat, I was curious what people would, how would they respond to it. And most people don't pay much attention, but some people will go and say, yeah. I've never had any negative feedback. Of course, I'm kind of a big guy. I'd probably scare people, but
yeah. Well, you probably don't hang out with a lot of feminists, but maybe
probably not. Yeah, probably not. That's true.
So, well, Tom, again, really appreciate it. Everyone, you can follow Tom at TR Golden on Twitter. You can go to menaregood.com. And his YouTube channel, again, is the #1 Men Are Good and the #1.
If you type Tom, in on YouTube, it'll pop up.
All righty. This has been a really great chat, Tom. I really appreciate your time. And I look forward to hopefully chatting again in the future sometime.
It's been a joy. We'll do it again. And thank you all very much for the work you're doing.
Thank you, Tom.
This is so important what you're doing. Getting the word out. You know, getting it out. The more we can do that, the better things are going to get. So thank you guys for what you're doing.
Well, thank you. We're standing on your shoulders, so you're doing all the hard work. So appreciate it.
I think we're probably standing on each other's. But I'm going to take off. You all take care.
All right, take care.
Thank you. I really like.
All right. Yeah, that was pretty fun. Man, I feel like there's so much we could.
He would be a great therapist. Like I was like, I want to open up to this guy.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't remember where he's based, but if I need to go to therapy again sometime, which I did for a period in my life, Tom's on my short list. He's my therapist actually, my main therapist actually died. So that was, that wasn't good. It didn't help. So let's transition a little bit. That was good. That was a lot. But we can't not talk about Smug Face this week.
Oh,
I feel like, and I know, I know you're fired up. Do you want me to play any clips does everyone, well, just to clarify what we're talking about, Keri, why don't you give a quick overview of what we're talking about and what makes you so angry?
What made me angry this week? Well, I think most people, if they're online, if they're the type who are watching this podcast, they're familiar with this controversy, but in just the broad strokes, in case you're not, this past weekend in Washington, D.C., a controversy erupted because there was this group of male Catholic students, high school students, who were in
white,
DC,
mostly, but not
mostly
all.
white, who were in DC for the March for Life, so which is the pro-life march, and which, funny enough, rarely ever gets any mainstream coverage. Usually, the only time I hear about it in the mainstream is if they can somehow spin a negative story from it. But it's a very huge march. I didn't know that in the past when I was in my little bubble. I had no idea it was so large. But anyway, these guys were there for the March for Life. And they were waiting to get picked up by their bus. They were supposed to meet at the outside was it the Lincoln Memorial? The mall.
I think so. Lincoln Memorial. Yep.
And so they were supposed to meet there at a certain time, and they met there, and it was a big group. But so while they were there were two other things happening. There was a Native American indigenous rights protest or assembly that was happening there as well. And there was also a group of Black Hebrew Israelites who were preaching at the mall. So the way that this story broke, it broke with a very short clip, an excerpt of a clip. And it was, I think, the ones I saw that were pushing it at first, but man, it was all the mainstream media. But the first I saw Washington Post and CNN, and then ABC jumped in, and then all the rest, The Guardian, et cetera. But the way they presented it was that an elderly Native American Vietnam vet was being horribly mocked and taunted and bullied by a group of white male men wearing MAGA hats. And we could start with that CNN clip. But so then here's what happened. Everyone went with this story. In the Washington Post, they interviewed the Native American activist. They got his side, but they didn't talk to the students. They presented, it turned out a lot of what he said were lies. He said that the student got in his face. And so the clip that we see is him in the midst of this group. You don't know how it started or anything, but he's like, the student got in his face and approached him. And first of all, he said he's not a Vietnam vet. That came out later. That's another lie. Right. But they presented it as this sort of horrible story of white men, since we're talking about masculinity, white men being this problem. And this is just a symptom of what's wrong with this country and with white boys, et cetera. And so then you had this rush of celebrities and journalists, like all of these blue check marks on Twitter, just condemning these boys without waiting for any facts. You had people like Alyssa Milano saying that the red MAGA hat is the new white hood for the KKK, and that until white boys learn to empathize, okay, as if white boys don't know how, until white boys learn to empathize with others, that our country's going to keep going on the tubes kind of thing. You had people like Kathy Griffin chanting, like begging for people to dox these kids, to release their private information online, which ended up happening. There was a Disney producer, this is a blue checkmark professional dude, works in entertainment. He put out a photo of a wood chipper with blood spewing out of it and said something like, MAGA kids going face first into the wood chipper. So you had calls for death and violence against these kids from
kids is an operative word here, by the way.
Kids is an operative word, from mainstream celebrities, journalists, and congressmen. So the kids ended up getting doxxed. There's actually I didn't share this because I didn't want to put it out there, but there's a big image going around where somebody took the time to screenshot pictures, individual pictures of each boy in the video, and has like numbers with their name and address and stuff. So they started, of course, getting death threats, harassment. They had to cancel a day of schools because of threats to the safety of these kids. But what ended up happening
was... Well, and the school disowned them at first. The school, condemned them just like everyone else at first. Their initial reaction was, our students are horrible, basically.
Right. And people were pushing for this kid to be expelled. And here's something that I thought was interesting about it, which I wanted to comment on. So a lot of my conservative friends believe the story at first as well. And again, if you just look at the way they presented it, of course your heartstrings are going to be pulled for this Native American elder Vietnam vet who's being bullied by these kids. And so what I actually saw conservatives who were chastising their own side or criticizing their own side and saying, hey, this is wrong. And that was interesting to me because I don't see that on the left very often. So I was like, wow, that's a big difference. They actually try and rein in something that they view as inappropriate.
That they view as on their side, but inappropriate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I really don't see that on the left. I mean, maybe in the past, maybe things have just changed in the past 5 years or so, but I don't see people on the left. They double down. They don't rein in their side that often. So anyway, that was interesting to me. Yeah. And so then a lot of the actual video came out. There was almost a 2 hour, like an hour and 45-minute video that came out of of context of what actually happened. And it turns out everything the media was saying was almost a fabrication, almost all of it. Like the group of Black Hebrew Israelites. Well, let's roll the CNN clip.
Yeah, let's play some stuff here because and I know I just want to, before we play this clip, I just want to say, kind of, because I think maybe a lot of people had a similar reaction. I first heard about this, and my first reaction was like, oh, damn high school kids, you're like, making it bad for everyone by misbehaving. Like I was annoyed. But then I saw the video, and the weird thing, I saw the original, just a little clip, but even that little clip struck me as odd because they were saying he's taunting and harassing and mocking and blah, blah, blah. And I didn't see any of that. I saw him standing there with kind of a smug face, but whatever, standing there, and kids around kind of like dancing. But I didn't see with my own eyes or hear with my own ears all of the things that they were, all the adjectives that they were using to describe what was happening didn't even show up in that little clip. I was like, well, I don't really know the context, but all I see is a guy pounding a drum and a kid standing there smiling. Like I don't see him doing anything.
But you're thinking critically, and people are being told the context. This is what the mainstream media does. They often don't. I've noticed this in the past few years. If they're talking about a video, something that happened, they don't show you the video. They tell you what happened. They don't let you hear it from the source. If they're criticizing someone on the right, like Ben Shapiro or what have you, they won't include the video clip they're talking about. They'll tell you what he said. And they tell you what to think. And so they were telling people the context. And then when you watch that clip, I thought, wow, these really rude, obnoxious kids. How could they do this? You can project what you're being told to project or whatever you want to project, whatever your biases are, onto that kid's face, onto his smirk. Because now that I've watched it from other angles, it doesn't even look like a smirk to me anymore. He looks like he's nervous and he's trying to smile and trying to figure out what to do. Because
I mean, I can imagine. Look, we're all in high school. I can imagine you're on a field trip in high school. Out in the big city, and there's these very confrontational people around you. Like you just kind of want to diffuse and like, I'm just gonna smile and stand here. Like I don't know what to do. I'm afraid to start anything.
The Native American guy walked into their group beating the drum. So the whole narrative was wrong. He went right into their midst and this kid didn't come into his face. He went to this kid's face. And then he's beating the drum in the face. Okay.
Yeah. Let's play the original clip as broadcast and talked about by CNN, which is a great representative of mainstream media. So hold on here.
You're hearing from a Native American elder and Vietnam War veteran speaking to CNN after a disturbing viral video shows a group of teens harassing and mocking him in the nation's capital. Here's the video sparking outrage on social media right now. Nathan Phillips was beating his drum and singing an American Indian protest song. And this was on Friday on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when he saw a clash erupting between a group of teenage students and 4 African American young men preaching about the Bible and oppression.
So preaching about the Bible and depression. This is, can you still hear me?
Yeah. Okay. I can hear you.
I
took
wanted
me a second to get my own video back.
Okay.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I wanted you to stop it there because that part just cracks me up. And it's so, I mean, just, it's so representative of how they lie. They characterize the Black protesters, the Israelites, as 4 African-American young men preaching about the Bible and depression. If you actually go and watch the video, these guys were there for almost 2 hours, insulting the Native American activists, talking about how they worship totem poles, and this is why God took the land away and gave it to the white man, getting into confrontations with them, essentially. And then turning their attention to the students who've kind of amassed waiting for their bus and calling them all kinds of racial slurs, calling them dusty crackers, calling the one black student the N-word, calling him Uncle Tom. They called them blue-eyed faggots. They called them, I mean, all manner of names.
It's horrific.
Incest children.
Yeah, so I wrote down some of the ones that I saw or heard. Yeah. They called them a bunch of incest babies, a bunch of babies made out of incest. They were like, this is what Make America Great looks like. If it's the best nation, why can't y'all get rid of lice season? If y'all the best nation, get rid of that damn lice on your back. Then, so the kids actually, the high school kids started doing kind of cheers to kind of their school cheers, not back at the other group, but just kind of probably in kind of self-defense. Like, let's just kind of focus on our school cheers and trying to ignore these guys. So then they were yelling, "Goddamn dog, get rid of your lice" at them. They made fun of one of the guys dancing and told them to put a bra on. And then they wouldn't, when the Covington kids tried to shake hands with them, they wouldn't shake hands. They're like, "I'm not going to shake your hand. Step back, keep your distance." I mean, the black Hebrew Israelites were despicable. Their behavior was abominable. Now, it should be legal. I'm not saying that.
Yeah,
they should totally be allowed to do that. That's fine. But if you're talking about rude, horrible behavior, you start there. And these high school kids were separated from them by some distance. And this Nathan Phillips guy, who turned out to be a liar, and has a history of being a leftist activist, walks in with his drum to try and basically provoke the high school kids. And then this one kid, Nick Sandmann, gets in trouble basically for not moving, for smiling but not stepping aside for this guy. Right. And he's viewed as the racist oppressor because this jerk with a drum comes in and drums in his face and acts like, he should be given the rite of passage because he's some fucking old guy from an Indian tribe, which I just think is appalling. And I know I'm supposed to say Native American, but whatever. Sorry, Native American tribe. But that's not a reason to step aside.
He also, he lied. He said the kids got in his face, which they didn't do. He got in their face. And I had arguments with people about this for days. It really made me angry because even after the full context came out with the full video, I had people arguing with me. This one guy's like, a white guy, a white woke SJW guy. It's like, the drum is a sacred symbol and you don't get to comment on this because you're not from that culture. I'm like, dude, I'll comment on whatever I want to comment on. And I'm not arguing the drum.
The smile is a sacred white symbol, so you don't get to comment on.
You don't get to comment on. Doesn't matter. But the thing is, like, it doesn't matter what the drum is a symbol of. It's how he's using it. I do not believe for a second he was using it to pray and to try and intercede. Like he said, he was trying to put himself between the two groups. Why didn't you go beat that drum and pray with your sacred symbol in the face of the black protesters? Why'd you do it to the kids? So you chose which direction to go. And you can hear in the video, the black protesters cheering him on. They're glad he's getting up there and getting in the face of these kids.
Yeah. They are.
And the sacred symbol, I'm like, it's how it's used, man. It's like, so I could beat a person with a Bible. I'm still beating them. I'm still using the sacred symbol.
Like, the fact that someone thinks something is sacred doesn't mean you have to respect it as sacred. Like, I'm not that religion, so it's not sacred to me. So I don't give a shit. Right. You don't have to respect everyone else's idea of what's sacred. You can be polite, but it doesn't, you're not disqualified from talking about something just because you're not the religion.
Right. And just because it's a sacred symbol doesn't mean that every way in which any person ever uses it is sacred. No, I'm like, look at the context. I have my own eyes. I can see what he's doing with that drum, and I don't believe his story that he's interceding, and I don't have to believe that story. And so I got pretty angry, and when I saw the just the compilation, just the immense hatred coming from, again, these professional journalists, celebrities, congressmen, I don't see that kind of vitriol from that level of it, and that from I would say like verified, professional, well-respected people on the right. So someone else was saying to me, well, there are people on the right who post death threats and hatred and all this. I was like, yeah, it's like the wackadoodles. Nobody, it's not
no blue check mark. No one who's writing for the National Review is doing that, right? That's
right.
Just not, yeah.
Right. On the left,
or the Daily Caller, even, right?
Yeah. So we on the left, we've let the wackadoodles run the asylum. The wackadoodles are in the media. They're the celebrities. Like they're the people who are posting this kind of hatred and death threats and stuff are well respected. They're verified Twitter members. And then we all know how Twitter censors wrongthink and anything that steps outside the SJW bounds. And so a lot of conservatives started reporting some of the death threats and stuff, like the wood chipper guy, and only to hear back from Twitter that these death threats didn't violate their terms of service. And so it's perfectly fine to threaten horrific violence against these kids. But, you know, we all know the instances of people being kicked off Twitter just for saying like a man is a man or a man. So.
Right. In fact, I interviewed Bosch Fawston the other day, who was suspended from Facebook for saying only Hitler is Hitler.
Yeah.
Just like, how's that controversial? No idea, but suspended.
But he could threaten death against these kids. That's cool.
He actually has, in his case, he has numerous, probably hundreds of death threats against him for drawing Muhammad. But those people don't get kicked off. He gets kicked off for saying only Hitler is Hitler. That's a separate issue. But like the censorship is crazy on Twitter and Facebook, and it's clearly leftist. So this was bad enough. So the left jumped on this. They ran with this narrative that was constructed and false. Do you want me to play any the other video at all, or no?
Well, just to show people what we're talking about, that short clip of the black protesters.
Okay, I'll play this other clip here. Yeah, we're gonna play a few seconds, not 2 hours. So hold on.
Of America. Let's make America great again. A bunch of child molesting faggots.
That's right.
Just like your damn Donald Trump.
So that's nice.
There's a lot of that, and all of this happened before the activists decided to get in the face of the kids. I have a few more thoughts on this. So one, okay, here's the adults in this story on every level. I feel like should be ashamed of themselves. So you have adult activists behaving this way. You have an adult who gets in the face of these kids and bangs a drum. You have an adult who goes on the mainstream media and lies about them. You have adult journalists who put the lies on the air and choose to misrepresent what's happening. Oh, there's just a couple of 4 young black men preaching about the Bible and oppression. Right. No, that's not what's happening.
You picture like Mormons with literature in their hand.
Right. Yeah. Right. So adults lied about it. Adult journalists lied about it. Adult celebrities and media figures and stuff wished death on these people and called for them to be doxxed. Adults doxed these kids, put out their private information. Adults threatened and harassed these kids with violence and death. Every step of the way, the adults, I feel like, should be ashamed. And yet we've all focused on these kids. And it's sort of like, I was talking about it with some lady friends last night. It's, you have this group of kids, right? You introduce an element of crazy into the group. Okay, so this guy comes in banging the drum. And then we're all judging the response to crazy being introduced into a system. Do you know what I mean? Like, you got this group, contained group, crazy gets introduced, people react in ways that are not necessarily the best way, but they're reacting to crazy being introduced. So it's like, and we're judging the reaction. We
and they probably feel threatened. They've been harassed for a while at this point. And this guy's clearly confrontational, right? So he comes in and beating a drum confrontationally, and for the most part, their reactions are kind of normal. Like, some of them are trying to join in. When he first comes over, they start dancing to the beat that he's doing. They're like, okay, we'll join in with your craziness. Now we're on the same side. See, it's like that's an olive branch to him, right? And of course, frankly, he deserves to be chastised. So, and even if they did mock him and make fun of him after that, he deserves it. He came in to confront them by beating a drum. Beating a drum's not an argument, first of all. And second of all, it was none of his freaking business. He came in, he started beating a drum in their face, and we're supposed to, the only acceptable reaction, according to the media, is because they're white boys, mostly white, I guess a couple black kids, but the only acceptable reaction is to retreat and genuflect before some, old lying guy who says he's a Vietnam vet but isn't, and is like some crazy activist who beats a drum for an argument. That's not a thing. Like they don't need to respond any way different than they did. And even after this, so that's all that happened. And then let's switch and talk about what happened after the truth was revealed, because, they went with this narrative. Okay, the blue check mark said a bunch of horrible things. They're bad, horrible people. Alyssa Milano is a horrible, horrible, horrible person, horrible individual. Fine. We know that about her. But they're operating off of a narrative that's wrong. Did the narrative get corrected? What happened when the information came out about the real context?
So I was wondering if it was going to get big enough, the pushback and the people on Twitter saying, wait a minute, here's the full video. The first day the full video came out, it kept getting deleted, by the way, which I was wondering, is that
Facebook
Twitter
deleted it a bunch of times.
Yeah, it's like they didn't want us to see the full video. But it eventually got big enough that the mainstream media had to acknowledge it. And so they did issue some corrections or follow-ups, right? And then I saw like well-meaning people, and especially some of the conservatives I know who had believed the first version and who had kind of used it as an example of how they need to rein in their side a little. Like well-meaning people were like, oh, I got this story wrong, right? And there were a couple of pieces like that from that point of view, like we got the story wrong. However, the most committed SJWs, it doesn't matter. Like I said, they're never going to correct their side when something is embarrassing. But you're also not talking about the fringe elements. When you say the most committed SJWs, still those blue check marks and writers for magazines like Slate and real mainstream media people. Oh yeah. So what did Alyssa Milano say? Well, her tweet was essentially like, well, let's remember that these guys were wearing MAGA hats and that they were at a march to, subjugate women and take women's rights away. So they're all about bigotry. This started from a place of bigotry. Hold up. You can't pronounce these kids guilty. You can't call them bigots because they were at the March for Life and because they voted for president or they support the president that you don't. You have no idea. What's bigoted is you saying that because they are at a pro-life march and they're wearing a MAGA hat, they're bigots. That's a bigoted belief. You know nothing about these kids. You're judging an entire group of people. You have no sense of what you're talking about. And so that's what became the doubling down started there. And actually, let me just read this tweet to you really quickly. This is a professional feminist, professional SJW, who I'm trying to remember. I think I've met her a couple of times. She's a writer. She's one of the professional journalists, SJWs. Amanda Marcoux. Her tweet is, cannot be stated enough. Racist boys. Okay, so she's automatically called them racist. You have no reason to call them that. Right. Cannot be stated enough.
There's no reason for that. Yeah.
There's no reason for that. Cannot be stated enough. Racist boys were there for a rally calling for pregnancy to be used as a weapon to subjugate women. They were wearing hats celebrating a man who bragged about assaulting women. Their claims not to be bigots are preemptively nonsense. That's insane. Right. That's evil. Right. That is evil.
But that is not uncommon.
It's not uncommon. She's a blue check mark. She's a journalist. She writes for respectable news outlets. And Howard Dean, my former hero, retweeted that garbage, which I was talking to you beforehand. One of the saddest things about this whole thing to me personally is I used to adore Howard Dean, and I started going through his Twitter feed, and I'm like, oh my gosh, what happened to you? When did you become a crazy woke?
I have to tell you, Keri, it's what happened to you.
What happened to me?
Howard Dean has always been a crazy sea monkey or whatever the hell. He's just a crazy leftist. But you just had a crush on him when you were a social justice warrior, and you need to just accept it and probably not talk about it so much because you're not going to get a lot of dates moving forward if you start admitting that Howard Dean was on your short list.
Oh man. Well, just quickly, I know I've changed a lot, but no, he definitely has changed. There's a lot of people on the left who've become more like rabid SJW, kind of the doubling down that's happening. They've gone further in that direction in the past 5 years or so, or since Trump was elected. And he's one of those people, and that's really disappointing. I know I've changed. but he's changed. And that's very sad. Howard Dean, what happened to you, Howard Dean?
He just took his mask off, Keri. That's all he did.
Right. Look, last night I was going through some old stuff to get rid of, and I had my old Deaniac shirt, and I had one of the yellow Howard Dean book bags, like the computer bags. I know I used to write undecided. I wrote undecided voters in South Carolina, like handwritten letters on cloud stationery about why Howard Dean was the best choice and they should vote for him. Like I was so in. Anyway, wow. Sadness.
Wow. The things that we do to waste time in our lives. I've said this to you before, but you've got a lot of evil to make up for. Really
apparently.
You have a debt to society. You're paying back right now. So this narrative, so your point though, which is really important for people to understand, right? When the truth came out, most of the mainstream media did not do the respectable, honorable thing, which is, we're sorry, we should have waited for the facts to come in, we mischaracterized these boys, blah, blah, blah. I mean, frankly, at this point, it's unforgivable anyway, because this kind of stuff happens so often that you should know better than you should wait for the facts to come in. Like even I know that, and I'm not a professional journalist. So but nevertheless, they didn't do that. A large percentage of them just doubled down, and what has become now they just switched their narrative to, look what he's wearing. He was asking for it, which sounds an awful lot like what you say about women who get raped.
Now do women in short skirts. So it actually was a guy who did, I think he was a blue check mark. Yeah, who tweeted that. He was like, when you put on that hat, you know what you want, you know what you're asking for, and you're going to get it.
Right. So exactly. Now do women in short skirts. Nice job, guy. So that narrative, and as you pointed out, they're doubling down on this weird like smug thing. Well, he's smug. Smugness is like assault now. Like because he's smug, they thought he looked smug, and a face crime? He said it was from Orwell.
From Orwell from 1984. So I remain convinced that, after Trump was elected, I saw a lot of articles and stuff I was still really in the SJW world exclusively at that time, right after the election. And they were all rushing out to buy 1984. I'm like, we got to learn what it's going to be like in Trump's America. I don't think they read 1984. I don't think they read it because you know what? It's the conformity, the censorship, the culture of fear, the blurring of the truth, the propaganda, the lies. It's coming from the left. So 1984 is very relevant right now, but not for the reasons you believe it is. Like, go read it. And he does have one of the newspeak terms in 1984 is face crime. And that's when your face shows something they don't like if you have the wrong emotion or feeling when watching a video, or in the case of this kid, I thought it was very appropriate that the entire country indicted this kid because of a look on his face.
Right. Where face crime.
And it's like what you said about Hello Kitty. Her creator said that she created her without a mouth so that you could look at Hello Kitty and project whatever emotions or feelings you wanted onto Hello Kitty. This kid's like Hello Kitty. Everybody's looking at him like, oh, it's smug, horrible. There's one blue check mark went on a whole tirade about that smirk. I know that smirk. Like, I hate that. I'm a victim of that smirk. And It's like, wow, lady, go do some open mic poetry. You just like, you're trying to put your whole past on this kid. You're projecting it onto this kid because that's your own stuff. Go, I had one thing I wanted to say about this, that to relate it back to SJW ideology, and that I think is fascinating and infuriating, is this. In a conversation with some well-meaning people yesterday, they were, and these are white female SJWs, or at least people who subscribe to a large part of the SJW ideology, right? So they were saying that that these kids, the boys, that their white male privilege protected them in a way that wouldn't have happened if these had been black kids. And I'm like, can you explain that to me? How do you see white male privilege operating here? Because honestly, and by the way, there was one black kid and he got singled out for special taunting by the black protesters.
Right, as an Uncle Tom and whatever else they called him. Yeah.
They called him the N-word over and over. But so explain to me how these how white male privilege protected these boys, because these boys were targeted by adult activists, lied about on the national media by adults, doxxed by adults, threatened with violence. They were harassed by adults, plastered across the media as the face of white supremacy, right? White male supremacy. So that's, wow, what a privilege. And the thing is, they were targeted because of their race, because of their sex, and because of their MAGA hats. So I don't see how white male privilege is operating to protect these kids at all. Like, what kind of privilege is that? And if it had been Black kids, I would argue that they would not have become a national news story. That if it had been mostly Black kids who were standing there enduring racial taunts from a group of white protesters, and then standing there stoically as a adult bang drums in their faces, like they would not have become maligned the way they were in the national media. You would not have seen journalists lying about them. They would not have been called racist and sexist and all kinds of names. They would not have been targeted for harassment and doxing and death threats by adults in journalism. And
it would have been treated rightly as victims of hate.
Yes, they would have been immediately treated as like stoic, like civil rights heroes. And so I'm like, but explain to me, to these women, I was like, explain to me how you see white male privilege protecting these kids. And so their response was that, no, if these had been Black kids, they probably would have been tear gassed or shot and killed or thrown in jail. And I'm like, wow, okay, so I don't believe that's true at all, that would have happened. But we don't even have to guess what would have happened to a group of Black protesters, because there was a group of Black protesters there. The Black Israelites did not.
And they were involved in this.
They were involved.
Yeah.
Yes, and they were involved. And their behavior was much worse to these kids. And they were instigators. They did not get shot and killed. They did not get tear gassed. They did not get thrown into jail. They did not get lied about on the national press. They did not become the target of doxing and harassment and threats by the national media. None of the things that happened to these kids happened to them. In fact, the mainstream media and SJWs have mostly ignored the fact they were there. They cut them out of the first video they showed. So don't talk that. I wanted to point that out, because that's what the SJW ideology does to your brain. It rots it. Like, you're putting your ideology first and you're putting truth down here. And you're not able to see the truth because, like Tom was talking about earlier, you're wearing these ridiculous blinders that tell you white male privilege is a thing and it operates everywhere and all that. Hey, I don't see white male privilege operating here at all. But you can't think for yourself, because you're being told everything you say has to be filtered through this ideology of male privilege and white privilege and bad guys and good guys. And like, this is what makes me angry, Carter. I'm like, you are sacrificing yourself and your thoughts and your ability to think rationally for this ideology. And I know it's comforting to have this. I used to subscribe to this ideology. It's comforting. It relieves you of the burden of thinking for yourself. And everything is more simple. It's like there's good guys and bad guys, and we have all these neat little categories. And so these kids are white and they're boys. They check off 2 oppressor categories. Therefore, they're the bad guys here, period. I know that's simple and easy, but it is wrong and it is evil. I'm not saying you're evil for believing that, but that is evil. No, and that makes me evil, Keri. Say they're evil. They're not evil. My friend is not evil. She's not evil, but she's pushing an evil belief system.
But she's intellectually dishonest, which is I think intellectual dishonesty is a lesser variant of evil. It's like pickpocketing instead of murder, but it's still a level of wrongness, right? Being intellectually dishonest is not something that's neutral morally. So I mean, and I don't know. The point that you made, that like we can see how they would treat Black males, like because they were there, really underscores this inability for any of these people on the left, including most of the mainstream media, to have any sort of objectivity. And no wonder they're losing their credibility. I think average people are starting to wake up and see, like, why should I believe anything the media says when this is how they report this kind of stuff? Mm-hmm. It's just dishonest. I don't have a better word for it.
No,
it's just dishonest and hateful. Dishonest. It's dishonest and hateful because they were picked on. Let's be clear. It wasn't white male privilege. It was white male discrimination. They were picked on because they were white men. That's why they were picked on. And all the left did was look at the color of the skin and the gender of the people involved and they picked the people lowest on the social justice hierarchy and blamed them. That's what they did.
Yeah. But see, they've been brainwashed into this ideology, like we've talked about in previous episodes, of believing, because they've bought into these new attempted redefinitions of the terms sexism and racism. They've been taught it's impossible to be sexist towards men or impossible to be racist towards white people. And so because they believe that malarkey, frankly, they're unable, it's not rational. There's no logic there, but they believe it. It's an incredible amount of faith. And it is brainwashing. And so no, my friend is not evil, but she's been brainwashed. She's bought into certain tenets of this belief system. And it is intellectually dishonest, but she's also deceiving herself. Like when I believe
it's not healthy for her either.
Yeah,
absolutely.
When I preached that stuff, I was self-deluded. I was deluding. I locked my brain up in a cage and I went out and preached the tenets I was supposed to preach. And I would have been like her if I were still in that belief system. I would have been trying to twist this around and force it through my ideology so that I could attempt to try and articulate it in a way that made sense. Because that was my job. I felt, to try and make sense of this belief system in the face of truth.
Yeah.
And
look, I think that the real red flag here for finding people that are really avoiding thought is people who didn't change their position. Like, I can be angry at the people who jumped on, right? And piled on these kids and called them a bunch of names. But then when the truth came out, retracted at some point. We're like, okay, I was wrong. Oops. You can respect that because they changed their position. They indicated that like they're willing to kind of self-criticize and be like, okay, this is what I thought before. That narrative turned out to be wrong. Reality is more important than my ideology. I'm gonna say oops on this one to some degree. But the number of people who didn't say oops at all and just doubled down, those are the red flags, right? Those are the people that aren't thinking. They aren't thinking. They've got their eyes closed and their ears shut, and they're just having temper tantrums and they're not thinking. And I don't know if you can reach those people at all. I don't know that they're reachable. I think people just need to start ignoring them because their opinions are worthless.
Yeah, they're ideologically possessed. I mean, that's a phrase I've heard probably Peterson and others use, but it's like they are possessed by the belief system. It's like that Carl Jung quote about people don't have ideas, ideas have people. Their ideology has them. They are puppets they are mouthpieces for this belief system. And yes, the ideology supersedes everything else, including their own principles, including truth. It becomes the most important thing, and that's their God. That's what they serve, is this belief system. That is their master. And
Girisha Jean in the chat says that is complaining that like sometimes people will default to the middle ground even if you try and correct them, and they'll just kind of say, the quote is, "No, I haven't watched the video, but I think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle," right? And that's just laziness and cowardliness, right? Because frankly, it is scary to realize that, what you did, I'll say switching sides, but like giving up the SJW ideology, stopping drinking that Kool-Aid, and thinking for yourself is scary, and having an opinion that might be viewed as contrary to what the friends around you have is a scary thing to do, and it is confrontational. And I think the middle ground is that's just someone signaling that they're too afraid to have confrontation in their life. They're trying to please everyone, and they're you can ignore them as well because they have no influence on anyone. They're the person who just tries to make everyone feel happy, and they don't have a well thought out opinion, and they don't have any influence.
Yeah, well, I tend to think nowadays, and the way I look at things now, that when they preface an opinion with "I didn't read it, but," or "I didn't watch it, but," I don't need to hear anything you have to say, dude. You don't know what you're talking about. Like,
right.
Go watch it, and then you can still disagree with me, but you will have watched it, and your opinion will be based in something. If you're like, "I didn't watch it, I didn't read it, but," you're about to tell me something that's not truth. You're about to tell me either somebody else's opinion, you're about to regurgitate someone else's opinion, that you read an op-ed or what have you, or you're about to just spout some nonsense that you're so disconnected from truth at that point. It's like, go read it or watch it, or at least qualify it with, I don't have an opinion on it because I haven't done the research, right? Like, that's
I don't know yet. You could say, I don't know yet. I haven't looked at it yet.
Yeah, right? I don't know.
Which is why I think it's just why maybe the news media has a hard time doing this, right? When this story was happening, I was doing other stuff in my life and I didn't have time to like sit down and look at it and write an article and sort through anything. I basically had time to like do one tweet a couple days later. That's all the time I had to devote to it for a while. And so I just didn't say anything about it, right? But if you're in the news media and you're worried about being the first to quote break news, then you kind of feel like you have to say something right away. You've got to present it right away. The more sensational it is, the better. And so, I don't know, Keri, maybe we're moving away from an era. Maybe we should be moving away from an era where breaking news matters and correct news is more important than breaking news. Because news breaks all the time. It's on YouTube and Twitter. Like, things are always out there before CNN can get a hold of it. Maybe what companies like CNN should be focusing on is saying like, hey, we know the story's out there. We'll report on it when we have the facts. Right.
Yeah.
Of course, that's not what they want to do.
They're never going to do that because they know that clickbait sells. And I mean, look how big this story was for them. This story was huge for them. Even with the embarrassment, we would hope it was embarrassment of having to retract things or correct things. They would do it again. And they didn't learn their lesson because a couple days ago, some girl on Twitter, I don't know if you saw this, some girl released a 7-second video. And she said, I was in DC and I'm tired of like these corrections that are happening, making the Covington kids look like they weren't the bad guys because they were. And I interacted with them and they yelled at me. And here's a video. Did you see this?
I didn't see this. No.
So this is a girl who, so she released a 7-second video. Again,
were they bad guys in this video? Yeah.
Perhaps, but we don't know what happened before. Once again, she's walking away from them and they're screaming at her, make America great again. And she's screaming MAGA, and I'm like, how am I supposed to put this in context? I don't know what happened before. It's 7 seconds, right? What does the news media do? Picks it up, retweets it. The Covington boys were yelling stuff at this girl. Supposedly they called her slut, which you can't hear in the video. They ran. They didn't learn the lesson at all. They took a 7-second out of context video. They took this person's word for it and then started running with it as truth. And I think it had like 100,000 retweets in one day, people putting this story out there. And I'm just like, no, they're not going to learn their lesson. They're always going to run with the salacious thing that gets attention.
Right. And they don't care. And they pick the salacious things that fit their narrative and their social justice view of the world.
Yeah.
So those are the salacious narratives they run with, and those are the things that they and frankly they justify it to themselves. Because I've heard reporters say this. Well, we issued a correction. It's like, yeah, but your original thing had 1 million views and your correction had 10,000 views. Yeah. So like damage done.
Damage done.
Like correct yourself so you don't do it in the future. Don't just say, well, we issue corrections. It's like that's not that doesn't solve the problem.
Yeah. I'm just looking up because somebody pointed this out, and I had forgotten about this story, of course, because it wasn't a huge deal in the mainstream media at the time. But they were kind of comparing the reaction to these white male kids just standing there and not really reacting, and how the over-the-top reaction and condemnation of these kids and all the horrible things said about them and how much media play it got compared to a couple years ago. Do you remember in Chicago, the black teenagers who kidnapped the mentally ill white guy and tried to scalp him on Facebook Live?
I do remember that. Yeah.
And they were saying racist things. I mean, they tortured him on Facebook Live, and they were saying
they tortured him on Facebook Live, and they did try and scalp him, and they were extremely racist towards him.
They were, and I think they even called him a Trump supporter. I think they used. Oh yeah.
I think they did, but he was like mentally retarded or something, right?
Yeah, he was. And so when that happened, I remember, and there was also around the same time a video of a group of 2 or 3 black people attacking a white guy and pulling him out of a car and beating him and calling him a Donald Trump supporter.
I remember
those things barely got play in the mainstream media, and when they did, they all it's like they're little soldiers. They're so professional SJW. So you have people like Sean King who are blowing this story up and talking about the face of white supremacy and what have you. And when stories like that came out, he's doing the opposite. He's like, the media focusing on this is white supremacy. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's like trying to make this out to be, this isn't representative. And so they downplay it. It barely gets any attention, but just look at the difference in outrage of two different stories like that. And the way that we've convicted these kids, or we were so quick to convict these kids in the court of public opinion because of their race and their sex and their political opinions, versus not wanting to touch or talk about actual crimes that were committed.
Right. I mean, yeah, one's a heinous, violent, savage act, and the other is a smirk.
Yeah. And this is racially motivated over here, but because we've been convinced you can't call that racism, let's not touch it. So
yeah, it's, you know, Keith points out in the chat, he says on this issue, one side is right and one side is wrong, but the middle is always evil. He's paraphrasing Ayn Rand. I think the quote actually, Keith, is crap. It's something about poison. I don't remember. But it's something about poison and food, and like something about like a little bit of poison is the same as law. I don't remember what it is, but yeah, it's a good quote. Someone else is asking you, how do we reach them, Keri? Laura is saying, Keri, how do we reach these people?
Well, I saw somebody responded, said, spread the podcast. Yes, please spread our podcast. I mean, the point of this podcast, as it's evolving, I think, is for us to try and make sense of this belief system for not just ourselves, but for people who are still in it, if they're open to listening. People who believe some of these tenets, but are not evil, who are not the ones with bad intent, maybe they'll listen and something will explain it in a way that they haven't heard before, like why the whole redefinition of power plus prejudice is wrong. Maybe it'll get through. I don't know. The other thing I'm trying to do with it is just like, we want to explain this ideology for people who are just now coming into contact with it. Maybe their kids are in college and talking to them about some of these white male privilege and all these different phrases. And so that they're prepared and they know what it really is and what it, and what
it's not something to be ignored. Yeah.
Yeah. It's being sold as something it's not. It's being sold as liberalism, and it's being sold as anti-racism and anti-sexism, and it's not. It's the opposite of all those things. It's illiberal. It is sexist. It is racist. It is not what they're telling you it is. So I would say, yeah, spread the podcast, but also just don't be afraid to challenge people. I mean, I know we do live in this culture of fear right now. It is coming from the left. Even as we were talking about with Tom Golden earlier, how people in that group of psychologists were messaging him privately and saying, hey, I agree with you and thank you for sticking up for men and boys, but I'm too afraid to support you publicly. Wow. Well, so that's happening everywhere. I get messages from liberals like that all the time. I still do. They're like, oh, I love this stuff you're sharing, but I'm too afraid to like it or share it. I understand the fear. The fear is real, that you could lose your job or lose friends or what have you, but do as much as you can, then speak as much as you can, because the more, and if you do so from a place of compassion or trying to have compassion, like I'm really angry right now, but I still will try and stop myself. Like, don't let yourself in these conversations, let's say you're trying to talk to an SJW, don't let yourself engage in behavior that you think is wrong and that you would not want them to engage in. So if they start calling you names, don't call them names back. That's ridiculous. It's not going to go anywhere. Make your behavior model what you would hope that they would be able to see. The way that you're behaving is a better way of interacting. And sometimes you can diffuse it with them just by simply taking their abuse and not returning it. You can point out what they're doing. I do that all the time. Like, I'm not a wuss. I'm like, oh, I see. Okay. Ad hominem attacks. Great. Can you try addressing what I said though? Or whatever. Yeah. You're calling me names, but let's focus
you can
on
also ask questions, right? And sometimes if you're kind of afraid to say that you disagree, you can kind of, because their system of belief falls apart if you just ask the right questions, right? So you can be like, well, why is that? And what about this? And what about that? And you can kind of play dumb and be like, well, I haven't thought about it that way, but what about blah, 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 blah. And just like, if you can get them to start struggling and see contradictions, maybe they won't change their mind on the spot, but maybe they'll kind of go think about it later and realize, like, I don't really have a firm grasp on this like I thought I did. Or maybe they'll be open to actually, having a larger conversation at that point. I don't know.
Well, research has shown that people, I'm trying to remember what the study was, but essentially it's people with irrational beliefs, when they're presented with counter evidence, double down on their irrational beliefs.
That's the study.
Sometimes that's one study. No, I'm thinking of something different though.
Oh no.
I'm thinking of, okay, so people always have a why, or it's much easier for them to have a why. Like, why do you believe that white male privilege exists? And they'll just spout out whatever. But if you ask them how things work, or how to end things, or how to, sometimes it's harder for them because then they have to actually try and turn the wheels a bit. So I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly, but people have opinions, and it's like, great, I know what your opinion is. Now explain it to me, like you said, just asking questions. But well, here's a great example. So someone who believes in open borders, right? And you ask them why. Well, I believe in it because I'm compassionate. And I believe anybody who wants to live here should be able to live here with no process. Whatever. So how would that work? And how many people should there be a cutoff or not? Like, then they have to actually start thinking about how to implement these ideas that they have, and that's a little bit harder.
No, I think that's great. Why is a great question to ask. Why and how are two great questions to ask, right? And
why and how?
Why, I mean, I think for a lot of people, their why is often rooted, whether they admit it or not, their why is usually rooted in some personal psychology, right? Like, why do you hate men? Because my dad left and he was horrible. Okay, well, I mean, that they're not going to say that outright, but it usually amounts to some personal issue. By the way, Keith, I remembered the quote. It's because it's in a great quote. I'm pissed that I flubbed it before. It's an awesome quote. It's in any compromise between good and evil, only death can win, which I think is a beautiful quote. But
I like that.
Yeah.
So one other quick thing is if you do attempt to have these conversations online, again, just really keep your behavior in check, and don't name call, and don't engage in logical fallacies if you can help it. Because the other thing is, if you're talking to a really committed SJW, like someone who is ideologically possessed that we talked about, it's almost more important for the people reading. It's not really, even if you know you're not going to reach this person, there are people reading. And I also get comments from people all the time who were just reading along, and I had no idea. And they're like, wow, I really liked what you had to say there. You can win people who are maybe potentially going to be swayed by this belief system. If you argue against it effectively and calmly and with compassion, you will win those people. So even if you're talking to a zombie, whatever, it's not very compassionate, but someone who's just checked out, and you're speaking to their ideology. You're not speaking to them. They're possessed.
Yeah.
But there are other people who are starting to weigh some of these beliefs, and maybe you'll reach those people. So keep that in mind. It's not really about that person you're talking to if it's online.
I was going to say something very similar. I totally agree with you. It's when you're having discussions in front of other people, it's not really about who you're talking to. It's about the other people that are watching. And there are going to be a lot of creepers who are just sitting there watching, and you have no idea they're reading your post. They're maybe not even liking it. They're not commenting on it, but they're sitting there reading. And even if they never say anything to you, if you just demonstrate, I've had this happen a lot of times where, I have a conversation with someone who's rooted in their ideology, and, I let the conversation end at a point where I think that they've demonstrated their craziness. Right. And I'll just let it go, because I don't have time to keep arguing forever, and I'm not going to win because they're ideologues. But anyone coming along and reading and can get to that point and says, gee, this person got crazy. And you can just end up looking back.
Don't go tit for tat with them. Just step back, because after you're saying, Carter, once they've demonstrated that craziness, it's like, you don't have to come back and suffer that abuse anymore. You can just walk away, be the bigger person. One friend said once, which I love, sometimes I'll do this. You can tell some people who they like to get that last word or whatever, that shit, when they want to be right. And I saw a friend once say, he made his final point, and then he said, now go ahead, have the final word if you must. and of course the person had to have the final word, and he never came back. I was like, oh, that's a great way to end it. If you want to bow out and be like, okay, go ahead, have the final word. Goodbye.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a great show. Anything else we need to touch on? I think we did this well. I don't know what's up for next week, or I would advertise it, but yeah. Anything that we need to add, Keri?
Something will probably happen between now and then in the media.
Yeah.
Anything to add? Let's just end on Tom's message, which is men are good. Men are not some illness that needs to be corrected. Men are good.
All right. On that note, which I won't disagree with, thank you for watching. You can follow us at Unsafe Show on Twitter. You can go to unsafeshow.com. You can go to youtube.com/unsafe space. Keri, we've got what? A couple different Facebook pages.
We have a
Deprogrammed has a Facebook page.
And Unsafe Space.
Does. Yep. So you can do that. So, also your favorite podcast app, just search for Unsafe Space, and you can listen to audio versions of all these. So thanks for watching. Please, honestly, for us right now, the most important thing is just share this content. We need to get more and more subscribers and get the message out. And if you want to help out the show, that's the best way to do it. So thank you.